to North Dakota National Guard's first ever Women's Leadership Summit. My name is Sergeant Fink, and I will be your host for today. It's truly an honor to MC this event, along with so many leaders at all levels of our organization. To kick off the event, we'd love to have the singing of our national anthem. So if you could please rise if you're able. Staff Sergeant Tessa Hogan will be singing our national anthem. As is customary, those in uniform will be at the position of attention, and those in civilian clothes may place their right hand over their heart during the singing of the national anthem. Veterans in civilian clothes may render a salute if they so choose.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Thank you so much, Staff Sergeant Hogan. You guys can be seated. This is going to be such a fun day. We have wonderful speakers, and I'm very excited to share them all with you. You might wonder who's attending today's events. Now, there's a mix of traditional military, federal civilian, active guard reserve, and state and contract employees that were given the opportunity to attend today's summit. Most of us work for the North Dakota National Guard, so I encourage everyone to get out of their comfort zones and meet some new people and do some networking today. So first, we'd like to recognize some senior leaders in our organization, as well as some leaders from various other organizations. State Senator Aaron Oban, District 35, Major General Alan Dorman, the Adjutant General, Major General Giselle Wilz, Director of Staff, National Guard Bureau, Brigadier General Jackie Huber, Deputy Adjutant General, Command Sergeant Major Eric Binstock, Senior Enlisted Leader, Tammy Miller, Chief Operating Officer for the state of North Dakota. Additionally, we'd like to welcome our speakers and lunch panel members that weren't already mentioned. Captain Cicely Littlewolf, Captain Don Dietz, First Sergeant Carrie Holland, Miss Melanie Carvel, Miss Sigrid Streeb. We'd also like to welcome all the other attendees who are present today. Thank you so much for being here. Last year, we arrived into the 2020 decade, which was a landmark year as we know it. COVID-19 and other social issues dominated 2020. However, another significant event happened, and that was the 100-year anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, better known as the Women's Suffrage Act. This law established equality for women and guaranteed them the right to vote in general elections. Equality in organizations has been moving in the right direction, even though there are hiccups here and there. It's important to mention that there are more women in top leadership positions today than ever before. Laws have been passed to eliminate discrimination amongst minority groups. Traditional roles of men and women are not as apparent and or expected anymore, and women are breaking barriers that would have never been considered a century ago. Though there has been a great deal of progress made in the last century, there will always be opportunities to promote, enhance, and maintain equity, diversity, and inclusion in the form of training, mentoring, and relationship building. We must continue to seek to mitigate and or eliminate negative stereotypical behaviors which can come in the form of discrimination in the workforce and many other ways. So, in honor of Women's History Month and the pursuit of equity for all, We are here to honor, recognize, and celebrate the accomplishments of women, more importantly, the women who serve in the North Dakota National Guard. We will learn some skills to cope with stress and increase our resilience along the way. Our sessions will be great information for all in attendance. Now, before we jump into the fun stuff, we have some housekeeping. First and foremost, the bathrooms are right outside the conference to the left. There's also bathrooms downstairs if you'd need them. If you need to take a call, please step out of the conference hall. If you haven't signed in at the registration table, please do so. It's located out in the hallway. There's a $15 cash fee for all attendees who signed up in advance for lunch. Please make sure you have money ready when you get in line for lunch. After today's event is over, we're asking you to complete an after-action review. It's better known as a survey. There's a QR code on the back of the literature on your table. They would really like you guys to be brutally honest and give us all the feedback you can. Don't say anything negative about the MC, however. That would be lovely. There are various resource booths to provide you with lots of information. We have built-in breaks for you to check those out. We have booths from the Veterans Affairs Healthcare System, service member and family support groups, as well as the Vet Center team. Please stop by and visit these booths. You'll notice some information on your table. For the purposes of time saving, I want to point out that we have individual shortened biographies for our panelists. We won't read a large, lengthy bio for each panel member, but we will encourage them to share a little bit about themselves when they get started. So please check those out. Coffee and snacks are provided to you at no cost. We want to thank the National Guard Association and the North Dakota National Guard Enlisted Association for covering these costs. Okay, so in honor of Women's Veteran Month, which was March of 2021, I'd like to take some time to read the State of North Dakota Proclamation signed by Governor Doug Burgum and Secretary of State Alvin Yeager. State of North Dakota Proclamation, Women Veterans Month, March 2021. Women have served honorably and courageously on behalf of the United States of America in every war and conflict since the American Revolution. The United States military has evolved from a predominantly male force to a force with more than 15.5% women currently serving on active duty and more than 19% women serving in the reserves and National Guard. The North Dakota veterans population includes more than 5,000 women, and women are actually the fastest growing cohort of the veteran population. Nearly 10% of veterans today are women, and the population of women veterans is projected to increase from 6% in 2000 to 16% of the total veteran population in 2040. With a rapidly increasing number of women serving in the military today and returning from deployments as seasoned veterans with exposure to combat, the North Dakota Department of Veterans Affairs and veteran service organizations across our state and nation are working to ensure post-deployment mental and physical health needs unique to women veterans that are being met. State and federal agencies and service organizations are working together to enhance health care for women veterans, ensuring clinicians are properly trained to provide gender-specific care to women of all ages, identifying innovative courses of treatment and solutions to issues that are unique to women veterans. Women veterans are encouraged to reach out to the North Dakota Department of Veterans Affairs and its Women's Veteran Coordinator, as well as other veteran service organizations to ensure women veterans of all eras receive services and benefits they deserve and that are unique to their healthcare and lifestyle needs. North Dakotans are encouraged to recognize the generations of women veterans who have proudly and valiantly served this great state and nation and who have played an integral role in defending our homeland and preserving freedom around the world. Signed by Governor Doug Burgum and Secretary of State Alvin Yeager. It is now my distinct honor to be able to introduce our top leader, Major General Alan Dorman, the Adjutant General, North Dakota National Guard, for his comments.
Okay, thanks Shelley, and thanks whoever started the applause. It's always helpful to have a transition up here. Shelley, thanks for that kind introduction. She shared with me last night that she was emceeing an event in Fargo, and she introduced me as, are we recording? Are we broadcasting? Yes, sir. Okay. She introduced me as Major General Alan, because I wasn't actually at the event. At least I assume that's why she said that. I assume it's not because she meant it in some way, shape, or form. But hey, what a better way to start the first Women's Leadership Summit with some comments from an old white guy. This idea was hatched probably 2 years ago now. General Huber, Colonel Lane came to me, said, "Hey, we should do a Women's Leadership Summit." And I said, "Why?" They said, "Well, we've already done the old white guy summit. In fact, we've done probably dozens of those already." But actually what I said, I think that's a great idea. And I don't know if you guys went to Minnesota, but I know Minnesota does this every other year. And we thought, well, that's a great idea. And that's really the sum total of my contribution to the event today, because Colonel Lean, General Huber, First Sergeant Rourke, Mr. Rourke during the week, and our Diversity Equity Council took the ball and ran from there. So I appreciate all the hard work that everyone's put in. My role here today is really two things. One, sit, listen, learn. Over the years, I've often given myself credit for being one of the enlightened ones of my year group. But my year group is a bunch of baby boomers. When I joined the military, I started out in the infantry. Guess how many women were in the infantry battalion I was in? 0. The armor brigade that I was under? 0. In the division I was under, a few in the headquarters. But I went from there to a Special Forces battalion. Not a whole lot more enlightened or diverse of an organization. So it's important for leaders like myself to really listen, learn, because we're a product of how we were brought up. We're a product of our experiences. And right now, I don't have the right background, I don't have the right experience to make sure we're driving programs within North Dakota that stress diversity and inclusion and make sure we create an environment where everybody can reach their potential. So I'm here today to learn, I'm here to listen, here to network. If you guys got some ideas of how I can do a better job of helping guide this effort, I'm all ears when those opportunities come up. The other thing I'm here for today is just gratitude again to the team that put this together, General Huber, Colonel Lean, First Sergeant Rourke, and a whole bunch more. Thank you for your efforts to make sure this happened. This was originally scheduled for March of 20. That didn't happen. I can't remember why. Let's see. So for me, this is probably a horrible analogy, but I'll use it anyway. It's probably totally inappropriate. But for me, COVID was like childbirth. There's something in me that has allowed me to forget the experience so that if I ever have to do it again, you know, the population won't die out because I refuse to engage in another pandemic. But we couldn't have it because of COVID. And we talked about remote options, but we, and mainly the team that's been working this so hard, thought that it was important that we gathered together. So we waited a little bit longer, but we are here today for the first ever Women's Leadership Conference. It won't be our last, but I hope we don't have too many more, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So again, thanks to the team that put this together. Thanks to the great lineup of leaders that we'll have presenting today. Major General Wilz, which I think everybody knows. She's been first in a lot of areas, more on that later. But I also found out from the Chief of the National Guard Bureau that she's a bike rider. I don't know why she went to share that with me. First time I met General Hokanson, I was Brigadier General Dorman, and he was Colonel Hokanson. And we were at a reception, and we got to talking bikes. He's kind of busy now. I don't think he's riding his bike very much, but I asked him, and he says, well, I don't ride, but Gigi's riding all the time. I'm like, what? And now Gigi and I, like proud parents, have exchanged photos of our bicycles. So Any other bike riders in the room? Yeah, we do that. Yeah, if I meet you once, I'll forget your name, but I'll remember your bike. But anyway, so we have that in common. Brigadier General Huber, geez, it's been a while, I should be able to pronounce your name. My right-hand woman, longtime teammate, and I believe owns a bike. Okay, good. That's my theme for this morning, bikes. So if you haven't picked up on that already. Melanie Carville, I don't think she's here yet, but Melanie is a bike rider. And I used to race and ride with her, and I would see Melanie twice during a race. Once at the start line where she took off and pulled away from me, and then once at the end where I crossed the finish line exhausted and she was putting her bike on her car and leaving. And that's actually a true story. If you see Melanie, I'm not making that up. Sigrid Streep, who I don't know if she rides a bike, but again, her husband would bury me on a bike, so we have a bike connection there. And Captain Little Wolf, where are you at? Do you have a bike? Okay, see me after. Well, because I'm not sure I can beat any of the rest of these other folks, but if you don't ride bike currently, there's a chance that I could still beat you. So, and I promised to be brief, and I never am. But anyway, General Huber was kind enough to share with me her presentation, and I asked her to do that just to make sure we didn't repeat one another. But I didn't say I wasn't going to steal some of her material, so it'll be on you not to repeat what I say. But something I've been thinking about too, and I think General Huber will close with this, but it's a quote from President Obama that talks about looking forward to the day where there's no more first woman headlines. And back to my original statement is, while I think it's critically important we have a women's leadership summit now, and the requirement is there for a while, I look forward to the day when we no longer need to have it because there are no more first woman headlines. And I can tell you, General Wilz has been a lot of those first woman headlines, but I have worked with General Wilz for many years, and it's not that she was the best qualified woman. She was the best qualified person for the job, period. And we're not there yet. And again, the leadership in the military, there's still some of us baby boomers hanging around. Some of you older Gen Xers, trust me, you're not as enlightened as you think you are. Because even the last couple of weeks, I had a 3-star admiral show up at my headquarters, he was in town and thought he should do that. And we let him know that General Jackie Huber, female, was also going to be at the meeting, and all of a sudden, there was some excitement and enthusiasm about that. Oh, I need to meet the female DAG. Well, what does it matter? I remember we were in Kosovo. General Wilz and I deployed to Kosovo together. She was the G3. Again, first woman ever to be a G3, probably of a maneuver battalion, at least in Kosovo, probably ever. And another admiral, must be a Navy thing. Any Navy in the room? Okay, well, they got a lot of work to do. All right. But General Wilz then Colonel Wilz was introduced as the operations officer. Well, females aren't operations officers in maneuver brigades. And the look on his face, he didn't know what to say. He was like, blah, blah, blah. But again, it's not about what your gender is, it's what your capability is. And we're not there yet. But again, I look forward to the day when we don't have to be talking about the first woman blank, because it is just something that everyone understands and appreciates. So with that, with all the progress we've made, there's more progress that needs to occur. I always write random notes, that's why my closings are always horrible. But it's truly my honor to be with you today. Truly am committed to this program. Truly want to learn today from the presenters. And I got to thank you too. Has anybody from the governor's office showed up yet? Okay, I am missing a cabinet meeting right now because of this event, so thank you for that. And with that, please enjoy the day, and we'll talk during breaks. Thanks.
Thank you, Major General Dorman. We are grateful for the support from the Adjutant General and his whole executive leadership team with our agency. None of this would actually be possible without the guidance and commitment from you and your staff. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is it's my honor to introduce Brigadier General Jackie Huber, Deputy Adjutant General of the North Dakota Air Guard and Chairperson of the Diversity Inclusion Executive Committee. Brigadier General Huber will be providing a State of the State address, so let's welcome her.
Yep, perfect. Good morning, everyone. This is awesome, just seeing all your faces out here and the attendees. You know, as General Dorman had mentioned, this has been a work in progress for 2 years, and just to see your faces out here and this become a reality is just phenomenal. I do want to say thank you to Major General Dorman again for allowing us and our committee to go forward with this event today, for Major General Wilz for being one of our guest speakers today. Thank you so much for being here with us. To our committee members that have worked so hard during these last 2 years to put this event together, and as well as for all the attendees and our guest speakers. This has been a labor of love, really. COVID shut us down here, but we are here today and really excited to present the materials and the information that we've gathered to share with you. As General Dorman had mentioned, we had Colonel Lean had come and visited with me just shortly after I got promoted and said, "What do you think about this? Do you know about Minnesota's program?" And I said, "Yeah, I've heard about it. Let's reach out and see what we can do." And so that's kind of how it all started. So Colonel Lean, thank you for coming to see me and visiting, and here we are today. So pretty exciting stuff. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the state of the state, and really what does that mean? I think this first slide kind of sums it up. It's about that which was, that which is, and that which will be. And I think sometimes we need to look back to see where we've been to move forward. We need to celebrate the wins, and we need to see where we got to do some improvements. And that's kind of a little bit with my presentation today that we're going to do. So on that note, where did we come from? What are some of the barriers and obstacles that we've seen? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of women serving in our United States military, as well as some of the laws that have defined and have put us in the place that we are in today. Since the American Revolution, women have been serving in the military. Although if we go back these 200 years, not always in an official capacity, women would follow the militia. They would help with medical support, with cooking, laundry, even cleaning cannons during that particular time. We moved forward a little bit into the Civil War. We had 20,000 women that helped with medical, cooking, again, all these different things during that time. We even estimate that there was over 1,000 women that disguised themselves as men to serve either in the Union or the Confederate armies. They had that much commitment and drive to serve. Then we move forward a little bit to World War I. World War I, we had more than 3,000 nurses that deployed to France. And I think what's so interesting about this particular, and we did talk about it with the proclamation about, you know, the 100th anniversary of the Women's Suffrage Act. But when World War I happened, women did not have the right to vote. You could openly serve in the military, you could deploy to France, do the medical thing, but you did not have the right to vote. So think about that next time when you have an opportunity to go vote and why that's so important. During World War I, we saw more and more jobs that opened up for women just because men were deploying, and so they needed women back here in the United States to work in some of the more administrative roles in the Navy and the Army, such as doing switchboard, clerical work, some of those types of things. Like we said, the 19th Amendment passed in It was actually in June 4th of 1919 that the vote passed, and it was ratified in 1920, 2 years basically after the war had ended. Moving forward a little bit to World War II, this is when we've seen women serve in all branches of service, and I do have to add for part of World War II, the Air Force was part of the Army. We had women serving in the Navy as waves. The Army had the WACs. We had the Marine Corps Women's Reserve. We had the SPARs that served in the U.S. Coast Guard. And we also had, and I thought this was interesting, and maybe folks do know or don't know, but the Air Force had what was called the WASP. And they technically were not recognized as active duty. They were civil service employees that became part of a pilot training program. There were about just right under 2,000 women that participated in this program. And it wasn't until 1977 when President Carter signed into law recognizing these women for their service as active duty service members for their contributions. So just kind of a neat little tidbit there. We had 432 KIAs in World War II that were female and 88 POWs. In 1948, the Women's Integration Act was signed by President Harry S. Truman, and this allowed women to serve as full permanent members of all branches of service. However, it was only limited to 2% of that population of each particular branch. And there were limits on the number of officers that could serve in those positions too. It was with this act that the Women's Army Corps became a legitimate program. We also saw the WAIF, which was the Air Force version, Women in the Air Force. And these programs lasted until the mid-70s. We then moved forward a little bit into the Korean War. In the Korean War, we had about 120,000 women that served on active duty during that time period. They were taking on new roles as MPs and engineers, not in combat, but taking on some of those duties and roles in serving our nation. The Vietnam War, we had 265,000 women that served in that conflict. We had about 11,000 that were actually stationed in combat. The majority of them were Army and Air Force nurses. We saw new jobs opening up during this time. We had air traffic controllers. We had intelligence roles that women were serving in during this particular time period. In 1967, President Johnson opened promotions to general and flag officers. 1972, you guys will appreciate this, women were allowed to command units that included men. 1975, the Pentagon announced that pregnant women could retain and remain in the military. But prior to that, if you became pregnant, you had to leave service. In 1976, women could serve as equals in the Air Force. That same rule came into play in 1978 for the Army, where there was a public law signed in allowing women to serve right alongside men, and that's when we saw the disbanding of the Women's Army Corps. In the 1990s, we had Desert Storm. We had over 40,000 women serve in that particular conflict, but they could not technically serve in combat roles. In the mid-90s, we saw on the Air Force and the Navy side, some barriers related to combat exclusion were lifted. So we saw some pilot roles and things like that happening. We still had those limitations, though, on the Army and the Marine Corps and the Land Forces side of things. And so in 2013, then Secretary Leon Panetta lifted the ban and said, you know, we're going to go ahead and we're going to allow women to serve in all military positions. That didn't officially happen and open until 2015. And as long as women could meet the requirements of the position and the training requirements, they are open to serve in almost any role in the United States Armed Force Services. In the past 6 years, there's been over 50 women that have completed U.S. Army Ranger School. We've seen female Navy SEALs. We've had over 300,000 women that have served in Iraq and Afghanistan since 9/11. You know, the military historically has been a military-dominated environment, and our numbers reflect that. But we're moving forward. You know, we're continuing to progress and move forward, and that's the exciting thing. And just to talk a little bit just about, you know, I know General Dorman talked about perception and what you see. Back in 2013, I was the battalion commander for the 164 Engineer up in Minot. I had the privilege of welcoming the 818th Engineer Company back from Afghanistan. They had a route clearing mission, completely male-dominated unit. Let's flash forward to just last month, June. I happened to visit the 818th Engineer Company doing an exercise at Camp Roberts, California, in support of the 40th ID. What a difference that amount of time had made. There were women, combat engineers, leading teams, directing sections, doing amazing things out there. And that's just what I've seen in just this short amount of time. We even recognized a young E5 sergeant. She just had a baby 2 months ago and was there with her team doing what needed to be done because she felt the obligation and the need to serve. So we've got some incredible stories and things and just change here just in our organization that we've seen. This is awesome. This is kind of where it all began for the North Dakota National Guard. This is kind of going back to my beginning, that which was. So this is a picture of Second Lieutenant Judith Claire Hoffman. She's in Dickinson. She's still alive today. Actually, our historian, Shirley Ogerson, is going to get an interview here now that COVID things have lifted. She was the first woman to join the North Dakota National Guard in the Army Nurse Corps. She was assigned to the 164th Surgical Hospital, and this was back in June of 1957. She stayed with the Guard for maybe a year or two and then went on different directions, but I love the title, First Girl to Join the North Dakota National Guard. And there you'll see a picture of her at the annual training from that particular summer. The North Dakota National Guard, 1974. This is the first Guardswoman's at camp. So I got the names listed before. So this is actually a picture of the first 9 out of 10 women that enlisted in the North Dakota National Guard. In 1973, the rules changed, and we needed new, I think it was kind of with the Vietnam War closing down and wanting to get volunteers in that, so women were able to join the North Dakota National Guard. I want to make a note on here. So this is 9 of the first 10. The one individual that's not on this picture is our own State Command Sergeant Major Derek Heck's mother, Delilah Heck. And so we got to get a picture of her one of these days. Good thing we're working on a museum project to gather some of these types of things, so I think that's pretty cool. I'd also like to add that the majority of these women were assigned to what was then Headquarters Stark, now the Joint Force Headquarters. We also had women that could be assigned to the Public Affairs Detachment, the MP unit, as well as 142 Air Ambulance. And many of these women, especially the ones that were assigned to Stark, they would be attached out to other supporting engineer units and that type of thing. So they couldn't be on paper there, but they could be attached there, if that makes sense. 1978, let's talk a little bit about the Air Guard. There's some exciting things here too. So as we know, in 1947 is when the Happy Hooligans became into existence. Don't have a lot of, and we got to get some of this data on the historical side on the women in the Air Guard, but I do have, in 1956, Captain Norma Parson became the first female to be a member of the Air Guard, and this was in the state of New York, and she was a nurse. She was also the first female member of the National Guard Association, so kind of neat there. And just talking specifically with the 119th, women were allowed to start flying in 1976. And as you'll see there, the first pilot in the National Guard of the United States came from North Dakota, and there's her picture right there, Second Lieutenant Marilyn Kuhn. Later, I believe she transferred to the Arizona National Guard, but what a story, just incredible story right here in our state that represents, the whole National Guard as a nation. We also want to make a note here too that from the Happy Hooligans, we have Major General Terry Sherling. She was the first woman to be promoted to Brigadier General within the North Dakota National Guard, and that happened back in October of '02. And she was also the first, and I believe only, United States Property and Fiscal Officer for the North Dakota National Guard as well, and that was back in '96. So some good lineage and history there on the Air Guard side as well. Taking a moment here just to kind of look back. So this is 1984. We're looking at some historic numbers of our M-Day and Army and Air. And you'll see that on the Army side. And I thought this was kind of interesting, just even looking at our overall strength numbers, pretty close to where we're at today. Really, those numbers haven't changed too much. Army Guard, we were sitting at 3102. Today, we're sitting at roughly, I believe I heard this week, 3059. I do have some strength data that you grab, and that's just a moment in time, and understand that that changes every day, probably by the hour, you know, what's going on. Air Guard was sitting at 952. We're over 1,000 now. So those numbers are pretty close, but just take a look at those number of female officers and enlisted numbers. And we're going to talk a little bit that down the road here, just to kind of where we've grown in that capacity. And I'm not sure if folks know here, you know, we have a wonderful full-time workforce, and out of that full-time workforce, you know, the National Guard workforce really started out as state employees. I don't know if folks knew that, you know, and eventually we had the Technician Act in '68 that we could hire folks, and we had a test pilot program from the AGR program in the late '80s that happened. And so we continued to see our full-time employees, more women serving in that capacity. But I thought this was interesting. In 1985, we had two female commissioned officers that were full-time technicians serving in our both Army and the Air Guard. So, and just to think how much has changed since then. And I thought this was interesting too, is that if you were a technician, your military rank was tied to your pay grade. You couldn't exceed that. It was linked. So, for example, if you were a GS3, we did have GS3s. GS3s to 6 were enlisted. GS7s were warrant officers, and GS9s were typically O1s to O3s. And even if you qualified for an 11 job and you were not in that rank, you were going to get that pay at that 01 to 03. So just some interesting things, how times have changed. So let's talk a little bit about that which is. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of our military numbers, where we're sitting today, as well as our dual status, Title V state employees. We're not going to be looking at contract employees today, and kind of give you some of the data. So here's where we're sitting at, and we did grab this data a couple weeks ago, and so like I said, that changes. Not that the percentage is really going to change that much, but for the Army Guard, we're roughly sitting at about 20% of our population being female. On the air side, we're sitting at about 23. We also took a look at our state employee population, and this includes all 3 divisions. So this is the National Guard employees, the DES employees, and state radio. We're roughly at about 31%. And lastly, looking at our Title 32 and our Title 5, and we're sitting at 19%. And I do have a caveat. You're like, oh my gosh, what is going on there with that? We had a big conversion that just happened here in the last year, where there was a number of Air Guard folks that were technician that transitioned to AGR. So that is why we have that significant dip with the Title 32, Title 5. If we go back to looking at those numbers that I showed you from 1985, since then we've had a 7% increase in our female population in the Army Guard for North Dakota, and we've had an 8% increase on the Air National Guard side for North Dakota, for a total of about a 15% increase since 1985. So we're moving forward, we're doing good things. We got a lot of work to do, but like I said, we're getting there and making changes and doing things. So we need to talk about that which will be. And with that which will be, General Dorman kind of alluded to this a little bit, talking about that we're no longer going to have the first. This is going to be a way of life. And we're going to have an organization that equity, diversity, and inclusion are ingrained in everything that we do. And it allows everybody, regardless of gender, race, whatever it might be, reach their full potential. I personally want to thank the women that pioneered, that came before me, that paved the way. I want to thank the women that I have served with, those that I currently serve with, as well as those future leaders that will inspire other women to serve in our future. I want to thank Shirley O for helping me with getting some of these old historic pictures and some of this data. Like I said, I think it's really fascinating, and looking forward to having some of that stuff more formalized. So thank you, Shirley, wherever you're sitting at. Oh, there you are. Thanks, Shirley. And I just want to kind of close this out. And you're like, well, why is this important? Why does this matter? So let's kind of take a look at it from this perspective. We are an all-volunteer force. All volunteer. That's what we pride ourselves. That's what our American heritage is all about. Today's data that I've seen out there, if you look at our recruitable population of 17 to 24-year-olds, of that, you're looking at 25 to 30% of those being eligible to serve our military. So it's a pretty low percentage. Now let's take a look at that and let's put a little gender spin on that. It is absolutely essential for the future of our nation that we have highly qualified women serving in uniform. We have to maintain our all-volunteer force, to live the life that we have lived, to continue that on for our families, for our future, to take those values that we pride. We have to. It's not a matter of, do you have an option to do this? We have to. And this does not just go about recruiting. It's about retaining. Those of you that are sitting here that are wearing that uniform, we need you in uniform. Our future needs you. You are going to be the future leaders one day that are these up-and-coming need. We need you here. Our nation needs you. So think about it from that perspective. And just think about, all the women that have come before you that have led this for us and what we're doing now and what we need to continue, to do in the future. Our future is bright, and often we just need to lift those barriers that are inside our own minds. So, any questions? Awesome. Well, I am absolutely humbled and honored today as I have the distinct privilege of bringing up our guest speaker today. She is a true mentor for me over the years, been a cheerleader for me, telling me to do things maybe I didn't think I could do, and being a really, really good friend. And just want to say, Major General Wilz, thank you for being here. Welcome, and I'm so excited to hear what you have to say. Thanks for being such a good friend to me over the years, too.
That mentoring goes both ways. Jackie's kept me out of trouble more times than I can count. Good morning. Wow. What an incredible privilege to be here back in North Dakota and having an opportunity to speak to you today. Thank you, General Dorman. I am not as funny as you, and I've only been riding a bike for about a year. And after all the comments I made, you probably never heard them. Working at Frayne Barracks and you walking by in your helmet and those shorts. I never thought I'd be on a bike. Not that bad. So, but those shorts are important. There's a purpose. All right, so thank you, General Dorman, Jackie, for having me here today. It's a great theme, Unleash Your Potential. In keeping with that theme, I'm going to talk about facing barriers. But I'm not going to do that for a long time because I want an opportunity to hear what's going on with you, to give you an opportunity to ask questions. All right, so I'm a little out of practice at this because I've been talking to a screen for a year and a half. Literally, right? So nobody laughs, nobody giggles. You have no idea if anybody's even listening, quite honestly, right? So I haven't seen this many people live for a while, right? Because there's only 8 pictures on the screen. So if I get a little focused and I think you guys are a screen, just somebody wake me up, all right? All right, so yeah, living in the virtual COVID world. As you read in my bio, right, or if you didn't read, you heard earlier that I'm the Director of Staff for the National Guard Bureau. Basically, that's the Chief of Staff on steroids. So my primary role is to manage the staff for a member of the Joint Chiefs, the Chief of the National Guard Bureau, along with coordination within the interagency and to facilitate the collective support of the National Guard Bureau to the 54 states and territories and the District of Columbia. Now, it's been interesting times over the past year and a half, and I'm not sure where that time went. But in the past 18 months, as a nation, we, predominantly the National Guard, have been combating the COVID pandemic and supporting the communities and people throughout the nation. We have lived through the events of June 2020 after the death of Mr. Floyd. We watched and lived the siege on the Capitol on the 6th of January 2021, along with the subsequent movement of over 25,000 Guardsmen and women into our nation's capital to ensure a peaceful transfer of power. And I would be remiss if I didn't talk about, while doing all that, we have combated the worst fire season on record and are in the middle of almost the second worst. And we continue to deploy National Guard airmen and soldiers around the globe in support of combatant commanders every day. And if you wonder what that looks like at the Bureau, in the Pentagon, the Department of Defense, I would say bouts of controlled chaos. Something you guys can ask me about a little later, or we can discuss later. But here's the bottom line. If it were not for the incredible soldiers and airmen and the civilian employees of the National Guard answering the call as we have throughout history, I think today would look different, and I'm not sure it would be a good different. So I thank you, and thank you for what you do every day. So let's talk about facing barriers. You know, I've spent 38 years in uniform. 32 of those, as most of you are aware, were here in the North Dakota National Guard. The last 6, 2 overseas as a NATO commander in headquarters Sarajevo, a year as a special assistant to the director of the Army National Guard, 2 years as the J5, Director of Plans, Policy, and Strategy, and now as the Director of Staff. It has been the unique experiences that I've had in North Dakota, coupled with those experiences outside of North Dakota, that has helped me grow as a leader. But I will tell you that it's been the experiences outside of North Dakota where I really had the opportunity to reflect, understand, and view issues on a much larger scale. So this is a Women's Leadership Summit, so I put a great deal of what I'm going to say in that perspective. But when I talk about barriers, they transcend gender. So my hope is that everybody takes a little something away from today. It's 2021, and a great deal has changed since I joined the National Guard in 1983. You heard Jackie say that. I think in '84 there was 200 enlisted females in the Guard. And you also heard Jackie talk about this, but many of the hard barriers we as females faced, taking on predominantly male-dominated occupations, whether that be within the military, government executive service, corporate leadership, medical and technology fields, these barriers have for the most part been removed. These hard barriers, as I refer to them, have been removed through the enforcement of laws, rulings of the courts, changes in policies, intelligent business practice, economic necessity, or by the sheer success of those who came before us. Now let me give you an example of what I'm talking about when I say hard barriers, and you heard Jackie talk about this too. Combat probability codes. These codes, used to be hard barriers for women because they barred women from participating in certain MOSs, going to certain schools, or receiving additional skill identifiers. This hard barrier was removed, and now all positions are open to women. But even with the removal of this hard barrier, which is absolutely the right answer, as you look to us as a nation, a state, or a community, or you look internal to the organizations we belong to, there are still barriers. And you have to ask yourself, how can that be? How can we have equal rights under the law, have enterprise policies in place? Corporate America is wealthier because of it. We see incredible, successful women who have proven their worth in every facet of society. How can barriers still exist? Well, first, let's talk about the second-order impacts of the original hard barriers. And I'll go back to that original example. We know that every member of the Joint Chiefs, all men to this point, have been combat arms officers or rated aviators. Right, wrong, or indifferent, that has been the path to the pinnacle of military service. However, even with the hard barriers removed, such as women being allowed to be combat aviators in the Air Force in 1983, and the Army opening up combat arms fields up to women in 2016, that is still a very short time. We're not going to grow a competitive field of female combat officers overnight, and the timing isn't in favor of those of us who have already halfway through our career, or in some of our cases, at the end of their career. It takes years to grow rated aviators and/or seasoned combat arms professionals. So it may be a while before we see a female member of the Joint Chiefs, but I'm hoping we'll break through that soon. These lingering impacts of the opportunities we haven't gotten because of the original hard barrier are still in play. And without time and experience and the opportunity to compete at that level, selection to the most senior military positions still eludes us as females in a collective group. So these are still second-order challenges caused by the original barrier. Now, as we look beyond these second-order challenges, the question remains, how can there still be barriers to our opportunities? Well, in most cases, the barriers we face today are soft barriers. Culture, family, community, religion, and I would say location matters. Yes, when it comes to soft barriers, where you live matters. Rural versus urban, east versus west, north versus south. And I believe these soft barriers also translate to the enterprises we work for within these locations. So let's talk about North Dakota, a conservative Midwestern state, dominated in conservatism, religion, and family tradition. These are invisible, soft barriers, but very tangible norms. These become barriers on how we see the world and how we interact with the world. These soft barriers and norms, whether we realize it or not, shape our perception of issues not only in North Dakota, but also global topics. These soft barriers become ingrained in us as a person. Now, don't get me wrong. I love North Dakota, and I take incredible pride in being a North Dakota National Guardsman. And if it wasn't for the experiences I have had here, I wouldn't be where I'm at today. So I'm not saying this from a position of judgment, but rather one of acknowledgement. I was raised in a traditional family in a small town. There were specific gender roles, expectations, religious and family beliefs passed from generation to generation. When I was growing up, women's equality, feminism, civil rights were things that happened in the big city, other states, and on the coasts. A perfect example of a soft barrier and its influence. I grew up a tomboy. There should be no surprises there. And I played football every day with the kids in my neighborhood, mostly boys. They didn't have a girls' basketball team when I was a 7th grader, so I had every intention of going out for boys' football. And under Title IX, which prohibited sex-based discrimination in any school or education program that received federal money, I was clearly within my right to do so. Physically, it wasn't a stretch for me. At that age, I was bigger and quite honestly better than most of the boys. That's a true statement. I was. I had already been playing organized baseball with the same group of boys, and there were no issues there. But football was a contact sport, and this was a shock to the system. So when I showed up at the first organization practice, the administration immediately started a 7th grade girls basketball program. Now, the seasons coincided. So although I still had a choice, a legal choice, the social community pressure to fall into traditional gender norms forced me into making the choice to play basketball. It became a soft barrier ingrained in me. So what does growing up in a small town in North Dakota have to do with leadership, with facing barriers and moving beyond barriers? Well, I would argue everything. Those experiences framed my lens, how I saw the world, how I interacted with the world, and many of the choices that I made, especially how I lead. And it has been the understanding of, the self-awareness of that lens, my lens, that has allowed me to grow as a leader. Now, it's just not my lens. I stand up here today and I am subject to your lens. We all are. We are subject to our superior's lens, our subordinate lens, our organizational lens. And these are the hidden barriers, or in some cases, straight out biases, that limit not only the opportunities we are given, but oftentimes the opportunities we take. Today as a nation, we have a female vice president, a female secretary of treasury, a female secretary of the interior, a female secretary of commerce, a female secretary of housing and urban development, a female secretary of energy, a female director of national intelligence, a female ambassador to the UN, a female deputy secretary of defense, a female secretary of the Army, and soon with Senate confirmation, our 2nd and 3rd female combatant commander. Now, does this signal that all the barriers have fallen, or does this represent opportunity? In other words, is it crazy to think that any of these incredible success stories equate to the elimination of barriers? Or are these incredible accomplishments individual opportunities that have come face to face and overcome those barriers? 3 days ago, Wally Funk, an 82-year-old female who trained and was qualified as a part of the Mercury 13 crew in the 60s, but was denied the opportunity to go to space because of her gender and not her qualifications, flew into space with the Jeff Bezos Blue Origin. 2 days ago, we had the first all-female broadcast team for a Major League Baseball game. So what point do we take gender out of the equation? In a reflection of my career, I have faced both hard and soft barriers. At first, as I talked to earlier, I faced soft barriers. We all have. How we were socialized matters. What would I be when I grew up? Was it within the norms or outside of the norms? And then as I made those choices, the hard barriers came into play. What positions could I hold? What schools could I go to? And as the hard barriers have fallen throughout my lifetime, given me more opportunities along the way, I, not unlike you, continue to face hidden soft barriers. So what can all of us do? How do we overcome soft barriers that are in society, in our organizations, or even ingrained in our own psyche? First, we need to open up and expand the lens in which we see the world. We need to chase and then take advantage of every opportunity given, and we need to step out of our comfort zones. Yes, you need to be comfortable being a little uncomfortable. Now, you also need to find a mentor and to be a mentor. You need a champion. I didn't get where I am today alone. My first champion was my father, who believed I could do and be anything I wanted to be. But throughout my career, I had several mentors and champions who not only mentored me, but gave me opportunities. They made sure I was building the right resume at every step along the way. Now, I see great champions out in the crowd today. And I'm going to give you a fun fact. There are currently 4 female general officers serving that all started in the North Dakota Army National Guard. All right, so myself and General Huber, but there's also a Brigadier General Nicole Belliette, who's in the California National Guard and currently serving as the Army National Guard G4 out at the Bureau. And then Brigadier General Steph Horvath, who is in the Minnesota National Guard, currently serving with the Cyber Command. I also believe there will be one more before the end of the year, potentially another Belliette girl, hopefully from Wyoming. Anyway, we're hoping. But again, she started in the North Dakota Army National Guard. Now, all of us, other than Jackie, left the state to become generals. First of all, there's not a lot of general officer positions in the state of North Dakota. So part of it is that. But here's what that demonstrates. That demonstrates that we grow a great deal of talent in this organization. And so when I look out in this audience, I see future general officers, future senior leaders in whichever occupation you so choose, wherever you choose to do it. So here's some truths before I get to questions and answers. First of all, I don't have all the answers. I have not always gotten it right, and failure has often been my greatest lesson. But yes, I am still a small-town girl from North Dakota who tried to take every opportunity she was given, and yes, even at the level I am today, I continue to face barriers. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions, and I will call on you, because I know several of you in here, but I really want this opportunity for you to talk about, I mean, I could sit up here and talk all day about, you know, living in North Dakota, growing up in North Dakota, but maybe you're curious about things I'm doing out at the Bureau or what's happening out there. So, Aaron, you're smiling at me. They're going to bring you a microphone, because I guess we're live. Yeah. And that just means you get the first question. How do you like that? Be careful if I know your name. All right?
Ma'am, two things about your thing, and then I'll ask a question. But I worked for, well, you were a major, then you became like a lieutenant colonel, and that was the first lieutenant colonel female that I knew in my life, and it was the coolest thing. So I worked for her way back in 2004, 5. And you told me some of these same things back then to open my lens. I remember I wanted to work for you forever because I loved it. And you said, you need to look bigger, Erin. So thank you. I would still be a budget tech. I think I was a GS5. Yeah, so what I've been wondering about what you've been doing out there is really about the future of our organization. I feel like I'm not alone in thinking that we're kind of maybe shrinking and we want to be growing, and so I'd like your take on where we're going next.
Okay. Well, I don't think there's anybody at the Bureau that thinks we should shrink, right? And there's probably 54 states and territories that do not believe the Guard should shrink. But I will tell you that when you look at the budget, right, and this isn't because you're a budget tech, and I can't remember the percentage off the top of my head, but most of the money that we spend in the Department of Defense is on salaries. So when you think about having to do what we need to do, modernize, transform, be able to compete with near-peer competitors like China and Russia, in order to do that, something's going to have to shrink. I don't believe that's the Guard, because we are a value proposition across the board, because we're mostly part-timers. We're expensive when they use us, and we have a ton of skill across the board. And I think this year was a perfect demonstration that where we're going as a nation, whether that's Homeland Defense, Homeland Security, or the ongoing DISC operations that seem to be increasing versus reducing, I don't see the Guard shrinking. Okay. Yeah.
Good morning, ma'am. Chief Kuntz. Since I said that I would ask you a question today, I've got one for you. So besides the number of females and the falling of barriers, what's the biggest change that you've seen in your career amongst female leadership? So has there been a change in attitude? Has there been a change in methodology? What's the biggest change that you'd say that you've seen?
First of all, I think we're a lot nicer to each other. And I'll tell you that because women are mean, right? I mean, I don't know if they teach us that growing up, but we're mean. And we don't like other people around us, other females, to be successful. And that's wrong on a whole bunch of accounts. And I think that has changed significantly. So rather than holding each other down, we have lifted each other up. And we have taken on those kind of roles. So that's probably the biggest kind of psychological change in terms of how we see each other, because we are mean. We are. People used to say, well, even people who were friends throughout this whole process, right? I go to bat for Jackie, Jackie goes to bat for me. It's like, well, I didn't even know you liked Jeej, or I didn't even know you liked Jackie. What? You know, so there's this perception again, our lens that we grow up, that we're in this constant competition. And we're not. We're part of a bigger cohort. So that's been an incredible change. All right, I'm going to start calling on you. Ask me how many times I've been lost in the Pentagon. Yeah, I'm in way better shape since I left North Dakota. I get lost in the Pentagon every day. You know how many steps you can get in the Pentagon? It's a bunch. All right, Jackie's got one.
Ma'am, I think it would be interesting just to hear, and I know we talked a little bit about this last night, just how COVID has impacted day-to-day operations at the National Guard Bureau and at the Pentagon and those types of things, and where you kind of see those organizations moving in the future with telework and some of those types of things.
Okay. First of all, again, it's kind of location matters, right? So out in D.C., the Department of Defense, and you guys felt that here in North Dakota too, we took COVID very serious, right? So we immediately went to a 20% in the building, everybody else teleworking. And when you think about that, and the Pentagon's got 25,000 folks in it, right? That's a lot of teleworkers. Parking got a lot better. I'll just say that. But what it demonstrated is, over the last 18 months, we've figured out the IT stuff, right? We've figured out how to do remote work. We're starting to figure out a little bit how to supervise and connect and do those things. So the department is looking long term, the Department of Defense, and really leaving it up to service chiefs. Where do we take that? Especially out in the NCR, right? It's expensive to live there. You don't have everybody that wants to move to the NCR. So there's incredible talent across the 54 if we just look from a Guard perspective. So how can we key in on that talent that doesn't necessarily want to live in the zoo called the NCR? So we're figuring out the remote duty. The Air Force, for example, is going to try to go to what's called hoteling in the Pentagon. They're trying to close down some of the big, it's not just the Pentagon. If you've been out to DC, there's tons of high-rises kind of across the highway, and it's Air Force and Army and Space Force. We occupy a lot more than the Pentagon. So how do we reduce the cost and the lease of those, get rid of those, do more remote, and then have people just check in, right? Put your name on a calendar and come into the office that day because you get that cube. So now as a Department of Defense, we'll never get there completely, right? There's still this role that you need to be in the Pentagon. You need access to secret and top secret and interaction with the Joint Chiefs need to be in a room together. And you need to be able to interact with your civilian leadership, Secretary of Defense. And although we've done a great job doing it virtually, I think we're going to get a mix and we're going to see a hybrid moving forward. We should just gave you all microphones. See, it's way easier when you're virtual, right? You can just unmute. Yeah, well, I will tell you that that's one of the downfalls of probably becoming a general officer. I sit in a lot of meetings, right? And I will tell you, we're finally at the point now where we can get most general officers to find the mute button. So,
Major General Wilz, would you tell us about a mentor that meant the most to you?
All right, so probably Major General Keith Bierke. So I was a young captain working in HR. He was the TAG, Air Guard, and he had me working on a project. It was called the Joint Force Headquarters, and it was 1995. And he saw something in me I don't think I even saw in myself. So he was my mentor, and he still continues to be my mentor today. But what he did was he gave me an opportunity to go be the OIC in the 164 Engineer Battalion. And that was when combat probability codes, you heard Colonel Huber talk about it when she said she was a battalion commander. So there was a couple female enlisted folks in the 164 in the headquarters, and I went up there as the OIC. And that was probably one of the greatest opportunities to go do that, to prove yourself in that environment. And then along the way, provided different opportunities for me. And kind of was my mentor and my champion, and continues to be today. Yeah.
Hi, ma'am. First of all, I wanted to say hi. Funny story about you.
Wait, we aren't telling funny stories about me.
When I first came into the North Dakota Guard, I literally sat down for 2 minutes in Sergeant Major Heim, came into our orderly area, and I was in the MPs, and I was fresh out of Bullock, and he said, "Hey, LT, what are you doing?" And I was like, and then my first sergeant said, "She's not doing a dang thing." And I said, "Okay," and he said, "Well, I need you to do me a huge favor." And I said, "Okay, Sergeant Major." And he said, "I need you to stand in for Colonel Wilz in a ceremony for the senior enlisted leader." And I was like, so I don't know where you were, ma'am.
How did you do?
Well, you know, I sat there in rehearsals, and all I could hear were all these 06s saying, "Why does Gigi get out of this?"
Yeah, must have been a little privilege.
So even though never formally meeting you, I was like, man, this lady's got to be pretty important if she's not here. So it's an honor to finally meet you in person, ma'am.
Thank you.
But I do have a question. At what point in your career, whether it was the operational or strategic level, did you face the most difficult soft or hard barriers?
I think there were soft barriers just about every day in the North Dakota National Guard, right? And what I mean by that is the lens. It wasn't the leadership who believed in me. It was kind of knocking down those soft perceptions, right? Including my brothers. I have 3 older brothers and younger brothers, 3 that served. And there were periods of time where, well, women shouldn't be there. Women shouldn't be in that role, right? And those were framed from their lens. Their lens that women had certain roles in society. It was how they were brought up. It was, quite honestly, how I was brought up, right? So, but you can kind of continue to face those. I will tell you that it was a lot easier to face the folks that looked right at you and said, "You don't belong here," than it was to face the ones you knew did not want you there, would make funny, smiley faces, talk big about how great it was to have you there, and slam you walking out the door, right? So I think we face soft barriers all the time. I think a lot of them were here. I don't face as many out in D.C., quite honestly, because the world's changed, right? When you talk about going into meeting with the Deputy Secretary of Defense and she rules it and there's 4-star generals calling her ma'am, that's pretty cool for me. So, but that's the environment I live there. And I'm not saying it's all like that, because again, we are a product of how we grew up. I was at a dinner the other night, they call it the roadside gang. It was predominantly done by the Air Guard, general officers that served out in Bureau, but now we got the Army Guard, current general officers and retired generals officers away. Now, I won't give away the name of the individual, but a retired 3-star general who happens to be in his 70s, was introducing some of the former director of the Army Guards and Air Guards and was talking about how great it was to have the leaders there. And he looked over at myself and Terry Sherling and said, "It's nice to have the gals here too." Yeah, so it was hard, right? I kind of grew up in that era, so I didn't jump over the table. But there were a couple brigadier generals there that female generals that just about went over the table. But it still exists out there, right? Because we're a product of how we grew up.
I'm really happy to be here. I am a Title V, so I am not part of this wonderful group other than that I get to work with and hear about great opportunities in the service. My dad was a retired Air Force staff sergeant. My granddaughter now is in the active duty Air Force over in Ramstein. So I really regret that I'm the middle person that really missed the boat. But I understand, because of my age, the gender bias and how it, just like you grow up, you're a little bit of a tomboy, but when it comes to the real world outside, you could be there, but you couldn't be part of the gang. So I'm just wondering, and you just alluded to part of that, how do those particular biases still affect you in not so much your job at the Pentagon, but in other countries where gender bias is very, it's not a soft barrier, it's a hard barrier. But how do you still face that today? Because we've got so much more interaction where we've got to be working with other countries. And how do the women play a role there?
So, and I've kind of wavered on that a little bit, right? I get ticked off, quite honestly, when we're talking about incredible relations with Saudi Arabia, right? And some of the countries that are that limited in terms of women's rights. But I also have hope, and what I mean by that is I think as professionals, that professionalism, demonstration of intelligence can overcome some of that with some of those countries. And I think some are making progress in that regard. But there are days it flat out kind of makes me mad, and I can't even have that opinion really as a professional officer. But I will tell you that it goes back to opening up the lens, right? So I went to Bosnia and Herzegovina in 2015, and I didn't really understand the country, and it was, and I could sit here and talk all day about that, but I was the first female NATO commander, another first, right? And they didn't believe it, and so I tell you what I did. And I know this is going to sound a little like a bad idea, but I wore a skirt to every event. Because I wanted to make damn sure they knew that I was a female and I was a commander. Even the Chad came up to me and didn't believe it, right? Didn't believe it. But I did that, and I opened their lens. And it sounds goofy to do that, but I was at the table. Heck, their Minister of Defense was a female. And the Bosnia and Herzegovina Armed Forces never had any combat probability codes. So I'm running around the country, and there's young privates, female privates that are infantry. And we weren't even open here in the United States. So again, the lens, right, of who you are and that experience. I'll tell a quick story. I got to go do a leader forum up in Prague, and I was talking to all the female military members, and they were talking to me about what happens when women have babies that are in the U.S. Army or the Air Force. And we say, well, they basically take a medical absence. Some come back in 3 weeks, some come back in 3 months. It's really about when you feel fit and when you're medically qualified to come back. Well, in the Czech Republic, it's 3 years. 3 years maternity leave. Okay, now some of you might think that's cool, but 3 years maternity leave, 2 fully paid, and the next 1 half paid. Now, but here's the frustrating part. The women had a problem with that because that meant for 3 years, their careers were stalled. They wanted to come back. But culturally, they didn't start daycare there until age 3. So unless you had grandparents or family members or anything to be able to take care of the kids, you couldn't go back to work. And oh, by the way, when you came back to work after just having a baby over there, you were frowned upon because of the culture bias. So, but it's opening up your lens to the world, and that's kind of what I talk about. Everybody's got a different perspective, and I think it's okay for them to have a different perspective than I do.
Good morning, ma'am. Sam Colness from the 119th Wing. I first met you in 1999 at LDC. I'm dating myself too as well. So I've known about you for a really long time, and I think you even had long hair then too.
I might have. I should be wearing it in a ponytail right now, right? Come on.
So speaking of those soft and hard barriers, you kind of touched on it a little bit, other than saying you've gotten upset about someone who didn't quite see you as who you are today. How do you still deal, or how do you handle those people without wanting to throat punch them? To be honest.
Quite honestly, there's times I just laugh at them and point out their ignorance. It's a better approach than throat punching. I think that gets you, I could get you a little bit in trouble. Not that I wouldn't want to on occasion. But I have dealt less with it in D.C. Again, I think location matters. And when you heard me read off the number of female secretaries we have, you know, we had a female Secretary of the Air Force, two previous female Secretary of the Air Force that have been female. So we have our first female Secretary of the Army, Deputy Secretary of Defense. So in that environment out there, you're just somebody at the table. And 2 stars don't rate very high at that table. I will tell you, I'm like a 2-star action officer most days. But yeah, I think smile, maybe get them to understand their ignorance. But again, also look through their lens, so educate them.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
I'd like everyone to know is that I was one of those NCOs that was up at the 164 Battalion when she was assigned as our OIC. And I remember the grumblings and the doubt and all of the talk within all of the men that I worked with about would she be able to, I mean, this is an engineer battalion, would she be able to do it? And it didn't take very long after she was there before they had confidence in her abilities. And they did enjoy giving you a very hard time. And you gave it back very well. But other than bringing that up, ma'am, the question that I have is, and it kind of ties into the question that she just had about, you know, of course we want to throat punch. I think that's probably every woman's signature inner move that they want to do. But in order for us to be, to overcome these soft barriers, what do you recommend for women that when we see a position that we want? I mean, is it a conversation? Is it training? Is it education? What is the most effective way for us to achieve those positions and to help others? And I know this summit is probably one of those things, but what tool would you give us to approach others?
Okay, so I'm going to give you the same tool I'd give anybody. So this is the equal tools across genders, right? First of all, always be educated and qualified for whatever position you're going to, right? And what I mean by that is, don't be the last person to go to your basic course. Don't be the last person to go to your advanced course. Don't be the last person who thinks I can do ILE later or NCOS later, right? Always put yourself in a position, pass your ACFT, make height and weight, all those things. Always put yourself in a position where you are competitive. And quite honestly, make people look you in the face, right, and tell you why you're not the best qualified for that job. Because it is hard to do that. There's only about 20% of Americans that can actually do that. It's a heck of a lot easier for me to say, yeah, you weren't qualified for that job. Yeah, you know, if you had passed your PT test, you flunked it one time, you didn't the next time, right? So don't wait on schools and education, and continue that school and education. And then apply for whatever position you want and demonstrate, whether it's through the interview or through your education, your background, that you're the most qualified for that position. But that goes to males and females alike. Just never put yourself in a position where you make it easy for somebody to not select you.
Good morning, ma'am. I really like what you said about, like, we have more and more women today, like, empowering other women, and I think that's super important. But one question I have is, how do we cultivate, like, male allies to also support us? Because, like, we're not going to get to, like, equality without their help as well. So that's my question.
Okay, so I had a lot of male allies, not all of them. I mean, some are sitting over here. You know, you got John and Dave Hall, but I kind of grew up with that. The difference is we grew up with our peer group, right? And we still get competitive within the peer groups, and there are still naysayers, right? Because again, it's everybody lands. But being part of the group, right? Having the discussion. So let me tell you a gender story. First time I got to go to a meeting, right? I was really excited. I got ready for the meeting. I had my notebook. I was ready to go in. I think as a captain, I can't remember. I think it was an HRO meeting or something, but or some meeting I was representing HRO for. And I'm so excited, and I go and I sit around the table, and I got my notebook, and nobody else is there. Everybody's out in the hallway jaw-jacking. And I'm like, what's wrong with these people, right? So later they come into the meeting and they start discussing a couple things. I can't remember which colonel was at the head of the table. But they didn't give me an opportunity to speak. Or even, it was like the decision had been made. So part of it is figuring out how, because we interact different as genders, right? So the meeting, which I didn't know at the time, happened before the meeting. So that jaw-jacking was those guys making the decisions, and I wasn't a part of it. So I had to learn pretty early on that I needed to be a part of whatever was going on with my peer group who was standing outside the meeting, because that's where all the decisions were being made. So again, there are some gender lenses, that play into it in terms of how we were raised. But again, it's doing things with your peers, male and female. It's being a part of the conversation before the decisions are being made. It's about bantering. Guys have been doing that since they've been little kids. Girls, we've been taking it serious, right? If some guy calls another guy a monkey face, that's all fun and games. Some girl says that to us growing up. We get angry, we cry, we're pissed off, and we're not friends for the next 25 years. All right? Who hasn't experienced that, right? There's somebody in Hebron, North Dakota that I smacked on the basketball floor back in 1982. It hasn't talked to me in 50-some years, or 40-some years, right? We just, now guys, they forgive. They beat the heck out of each other in the football, hockey, wherever it is. And then they go have beer together. Somehow we haven't figured that out as females, right? So, but that's part of it. And I hope that helps, but being part of the group. Somebody's got to let me know when I am running out of time.
Ma'am, just on a personal note, you talk about the ingrained psyche. I know I've struggled with that personally, and I think my worst enemy is myself. And anytime I feel like I've made a slight failure, or if I don't accomplish things the way I wanted to, that psyche of family members, or albeit saying females don't belong in the military, it's like a big boulder coming down a mountain as soon as I make a tiny failure. How have you personally found confidence and pushed through that ingrained psyche?
So my entire life, I've wanted to prove people wrong. And then I hear the people who have supported me, right? So I've had days like that. I've had days. I remember when the engineer brigade was coming to North Dakota. It was an engineer group, and I was a battle captain in the engineer group. And I remember a lieutenant colonel said, well, we're going to have to get you out of the engineer group because this is going to be an all-male. We're going to be Hula, and we're going to be combat now, so you're no longer going to be a part of the engineer brigade. Because at the time, the engineer brigade was combat probability coded for males only. And man, I was angry because I thought I'd finally found my niche. Quite honestly, it was fighting through that, and then that barrier fell. But again, you're going to be challenged by that. I think we all are, because of how we were raised. Again, I love being from North Dakota, but there are some. We have certain gender roles. So you just got to prove people wrong. And some days it's harder than others. But find a champion, find a friend, find a mentor that helps you through those kind of times. Because I'm not sure I would have made it through those times if it were not for the folks that believed in me. Man, how about some fun questions?
Can't go without speaking. You know me.
I know. I'm hoping you give me one of those really good fun questions.
No, it'll be good. Okay, so about 6-ish years ago, General Wilz gave me a cool opportunity. I was a super young captain, and she was getting promoted to the rank of 1-star. And so she reached out to me, and I didn't know her very well, but she said, would you plan my promotion ceremony? It was incredible at the Heritage Center. So thank you for that opportunity, ma'am. If you could go back and tell Lieutenant Wilz something, what would you do? What would you tell that person?
Well, I'd probably tell her a whole bunch of things. There's the stick it with it. Be professional in everything you do. I think you know, we talk about lessons. Some of my greatest lessons have been from failures, and I think it's okay for lieutenants to fail. Quite honestly, this zero defect military that we're in scares me because it creates risk aversion, right? So I think it's okay for young lieutenant. Now they need to be lieutenant and captain mistakes, but I would go back and I would say stick with it. Don't be afraid to leave North Dakota earlier, quite honestly. I was comfortable here. I knew everybody here. I had brothers in the Guard. My father was in the Guard. And I was afraid that I would not be successful outside without that support system. So I would go back and say, take other opportunities sooner, explore the world, open up your lens earlier. That's what I would tell her.
All right, I have a fun question, ma'am. Okay. When you said you did basketball in high school, did you know the Caldwell sisters in North Dakota?
The Caldwell, what year?
Goodness, they'd be my great aunts, but. It's not that bad.
Yeah, that was good, huh? No, it's very, no, I did not. I did not. But I probably should have, right?
They were in Gardner, North Dakota.
Gardner, yeah.
I know.
No.
A lot of people come to me and go, did you know those two? I was like, well, yeah. But.
Yeah, nope, I didn't.
Okay.
You know, I probably should have, though. Yeah. Listen, I hung out at the social a little bit last night and even walking in here this morning, and I do see some very familiar faces, but I was commenting with a few folks that, oh my God, the world's changed in 6 years, you know? And it's exciting to see the new faces and the new leaders running around, and some of the older ones too, and the more seasoned ones. So yeah, you know, 83, 38 years, I probably should have known them.
You remind me a lot of them, and they would have loved you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good morning, ma'am. My question for you is, when facing frustrations within your career, whether that being a hard or soft barrier, how did you persevere and refocus your lens to drive on within your career field?
I think it goes back to having a great support network, right? I mean, whether it was they didn't want me to be an engineer officer, whether it was the challenges you have going on deployments, you know. I like General Huber, we're Desert Storm of vets. I think having a group of folks that believe in you and having that support network is important. So, again, I think networking, this relationship, is important.
Good morning, ma'am. Michelle Hagel, Legal
Hi,
Office.
Michelle.
Hi. This isn't a very fun question, but I think it's an important one as we're talking about barriers, because this impacts women more. The sexual assault, sexual harassment realm, and I'm not sure if you can speak on it, but we hear big changes are coming. We've sat on the national level of programs to help prepare the report. But we're anticipating there's some changes coming to the sexual assault, military justice side of things, and possible criminalization of sexual harassment. Wondering if you have any insight as to what we can expect on that.
No, I can't, and I don't have a lot of insight. Yes, there's changes. Yes, a lot of that is going to be applicable to Title 10, right? And one of the things that happens in the department is we don't always look how that's going to impact the system in terms of Title 32 and the authority of the states and the authorities of the governors. So although there are going to be significant changes, taking that out of the system, and letting an outside entity actually try and do those things, we still have to figure out how that applies to the 54. But there will be changes.
Good morning, General Wilz.
Morning.
Major Benstock. So you talked a lot about champions throughout your career. You talked a lot about mentors throughout your career. And I noticed you referenced a lot of officers, that been a great part of your career. So as being a senior NCO in this organization, as I look across the organization, I look at airmen, soldiers, female, male, it really doesn't matter. We look for potential. And we look where we can best position our potential to make this organization better. I want you to just talk a little bit about the NCO relationship that you have had from the time as a lieutenant all the way up to now, and how that influenced your career, positively or negatively, but about that, the relationship that needs to happen. Thank you.
Great point, because I think command teams are really important. So I had a really good role model in my father. His sergeant major was his best friend. So when I saw them off duty and I saw them on duty, and I got to watch that, and the professionalism on duty was just incredible, right? Understanding the accountability and responsibility roles, understanding that relationship. So I've always modeled my relation as an officer with the NCO that worked for me after that. So let's talk through my career. I was a 19-year-old lieutenant. My platoon sergeant had children as old as I was, right? That's a difficult situation, and then I was a female. So that first relationship, not so good, right? Just sit over there, Lieutenant, I'll make this shit happen. It's basically what it is. Just go mind whatever you do, okay? But as I grew as an officer, and I started being able to mentor and develop more NCOs in that kind of peer collaborative group that you do when you're out in a platoon and all those kind of things, and prove my value, that relationship with NCOs changed. So by the time I was a company commander, my relationship with my first sergeant was incredible, right? And we thought it was key to build NCOs in that arena. Again, go to the battalion sergeant major, incredible. Some of my hardest lessons have been taught to me by incredible NCOs. What I believe in terms of the command team is incredible. When I went to Bosnia, I handpicked. I got the privilege of taking Command Sergeant Major Schwind with me. Now, he had been the state command sergeant major for a number of years, and I had known Harley for a number of years. But that relationship, it was kind of amazing because other countries don't look at that the way we do. So when we went over to Bosnia-Herzegovina, their enlisted folks down here, officers here, the two shall never mix. They had a sergeant major because, America's got sergeant majors, so we'll have a sergeant major. But their sergeant majors only had a role to be with the enlisted folks. They never had a role as a command team. So command teams are very important to me. I will tell you I've been challenged by it out at Bureau because I've always had NCOs in the room. And when you get out to the Bureau, first number of meetings when I was the Special Assistant Director of the Army Guard, there were no NCOs in the room. And one day I'm getting a briefing to go sit in another meeting, right? You have to have a meeting before the meeting when you go out there. And I'm getting a briefing, quite honestly, about the new ACFT. and I got 3 or 4 majors sitting around the room and a couple lieutenant colonels, and I'm looking around the room and I'm like, hey, where's the sergeant majors on this? Well, what do you mean, ma'am? No, where are the sergeant majors? They're the ones that talk to me about the impacts of soldiers, not you guys sitting around this room. So we canceled the meeting and they went and got. But I see that there, right? That because they take on more staff and less field roles out at Bureau, they're not engaging the NCOs, right? And as we know, whether it's officers or NCO, there are several NCOs in the North Dakota National Guard that are lawyers and business owners and medical folks. So the role that NCOs play as we grow, and you just kind of pick what you're more comfortable with, what you want to do, and how you want to lead. If you want to stay with soldiers and be with soldiers every day because that's your calling and do those kind of things, well, then you're going to make a hell of an NCO, right? If you want to take on a few more of the leader responsibilities bigger than that day-to-day soldier training and mentoring, then maybe officers are calling. But they're both vitally as important. And they've been critical in my career.
Morning, ma'am.
DJ.
How are you?
Good.
Ma'am,
Speaking of NCOs that have been important in my career.
Ma'am, my question for you is what in all your roles so far in your career, what's your favorite? And then my next question is, could you talk a little bit about building teams? In my experience working for you, ma'am, you're a heck of a team builder, so I'm just curious what your approach is. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about a couple different jobs. My favorite rank was captain. Quite honestly, captain is just, you could just stay out of trouble, but you still were a commander, and you had all that, and you had the whole world in front of you. So that was my favorite rank. One of my favorite positions here in the state of North Dakota was an OIC of a battalion, because you owned it. You were responsible for it, and you were ensured that the traditional chain of command had kind of all they needed when it comes to drilling and taking care of and training and equipping soldiers. My favorite job as a general officer was a NATO commander in Bosnia-Herzegovina, because I think that's where I grew more as a leader, understanding that environment and being in that mix every day, and I had some great things there. In terms of building teams, it seems, DJ, like it's getting harder nowadays. So you get an opportunity to build a team. In North Dakota, we probably spend more time pre and post-COVID doing some socialization, doing some family events and those kind of things. Again, I'm struggling with it at the Bureau, right? People commute. There's a lot of geo batches that work at the Bureau. And when you leave at the end of the day, you go home and you don't come back till the next day. So, and it's hard in the pace that we operate in to build teams. So one of the things we've been doing is I've been doing more town halls. I actually have more meetings so I can build teams. So I actually have a stand-up with all the joint directors on a daily basis. It's way better in person because you can be funny and you can see how people are reacting to what you're doing. It's been a little challenging virtually. And then, DJ, as you know better than anybody, I do walkabouts. It just takes me a little bit longer in the Pentagon. I got the time hack. All right. So, thanks for the incredible questions. In closing today, I look out at the incredible men and women here, the leaders. I'm proud to be from North Dakota, and I am super excited about the future. So I look out and see some in the crowd who are my age, not very many, but a couple, and know that they have experienced throughout their career some of the same barriers I have. I also look out and see the young ones in the crowd who will never know or experience some of the barriers that used to be in existence, and I'm excited about that. I'm in the middle. There are so many that came before me who have fought to have barriers removed but never saw the fruits of their labor come to fruition. And there will be many behind me and us that will one day only read about the barriers that existed and shake their heads and simply won't be able to imagine it. So, I'm proud to stand here today during such an amazing time in our history, the history for women, quite honestly, because we are breaking barriers, and I can't wait till we no longer have any more firsts. But the history of the Army, the North Dakota National Guard, and our great country. So thank you for all the great questions today. I'm going to hang around for a while if you want to hear any more stories about General Dorman.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for those words. On behalf of the North Dakota National Guard and our Diversity and Inclusion Executive Committee, please accept this token of appreciation. Okay, we're going to take a short break, a 15-minute break, actually. I'll set a timer and give a 3-minute warning when we're ready to reconvene. But please check out the resource booth, network, take a bathroom break, get some snacks or coffee, whatever you guys need. And we'll see you back in 15 minutes.